Over the last few years, warfare has changed dramatically. Cheap drones now put eyes in the sky almost everywhere, and thermal imaging makes traditional camouflage far less effective than it once was. But when you look at most civilian preparedness setups, not much has really changed. People still focus heavily on camouflage patterns and gear setups that were designed for a very different environment.
Welcome back to Mission Ready Society. I'm your host, Oren Price, and in today's video, we're talking about how drones, thermal imaging, and modern surveillance have changed the battlefield. We're going to discuss what this means for gear, movement, and concealment. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about in this video today is probably a piece of technology that has advanced the battlefield the most, and that is drones. Now, drones have become super popular in recent years, especially looking at the Russian-Ukraine war. That is kind of the key area that they're currently being used in. But drones and unmanned air systems have become extremely popular in modern warfare. So today we're going to kind of talk about how drones have changed the way that we think about kind of our movement and concealment. Not so much our gear, but mainly our movement and concealment. So the thing that drones have really impacted is what we need to be aware to, right? So before drones were a big thing on the battlefield, we mainly were focused on what can spot us from ground level, right? Obviously we've had aircraft and they've been around for a really long time, but when you're thinking about aircraft and maybe we're thinking about helicopters and people spotting from above, that's a lot more difficult than like a drone or a unmanned air system, UAS. So nowadays what we really need to be aware of is not only what can spot us on the ground, but what can spot us from the sky as well, right? So we'll use this area I'm standing in as an example, but if I'm walking through this area, right, it's not very densely wooded. It's pretty open, looking up, the trees aren't very thick. It is still winter time, so there's no leaves on the trees. Walking in an area like this, a drone can very easily spot me from above, right? Now, just from ground level, it'd be easy for somebody to see me from over there, but now I need to be paying attention to the sky as well, right? So we're gonna kind of talk about, some things you can do to reduce your, chances of being spotted by a drone. But that's kind of the main thing that we need to pay attention to, is really just what is above us, right? So when we're talking about cover and concealment, right? Cover is obviously something that is not impenetrable by rounds, right? So bullets. And concealment is something that it's not like, it won't stop things, but it will prevent you from being spotted. So that's why we're kind of really be talking about concealment in this portion of the video. And concealment, like I said, is really just like something that masks you or hides you from what you're trying to not be spotted from, right? So that can be trees, it can be dense vegetation, it can be rocks, it can be buildings. Basically anything that puts you between the line of sight and whether it be a drone system or it be a person on the ground. So let's kind of talk about that concealment. All right, so the first thing we're going to kind of talk about is what's not good concealment, especially when we're talking about drones or eyes in the sky, right? So where I'm standing right now is a prime example of an area you do not want to be in, right? Now, when we look at Ukraine war footage and stuff like that, you'll notice that the landscape of Ukraine is very, very open, right? And that is why they've mainly resorted to trench warfare and stuff like that. It's just because of how open the terrain is. Now, what I'm standing in is what we would classify as a open danger area, or an ODA for short. And essentially what it means is just a large open area that provides you no cover or concealment, right? So me standing out here in the open, granted I'm kind of on the wood line right now, but if I'm like out there in the open where it's wide open, right, nothing is protecting me from above from being seen, and nothing is protecting me from, you know, the ground level either. So if I'm just walking through this wide open area, I'm going to easily be spotted by personnel on the ground, and I'm also going to be very easily spotted from the sky. So the best way to prevent that is, if you know you're going to be somewhere where there's an open danger area, try and stick to either the woods as much as possible, or figure out whatever the best route is going to be possible to prevent you from having to go through this wide open area. Those are kind of really the only like choices you have. Now granted, if you're somewhere where you know, there isn't really woods, like if you're in an urban setting, really trying to stick to like inside buildings, or basically things that are going to provide you concealment from not only your surroundings but from the sky as well, right? So like I said, this is a really bad area you want to be in. This is probably the number one place you don't want to find yourself in, especially when we're considering drones. All right, I do want to apologize for the construction in the background if it is a little loud. Unfortunately, there's like a factory that's just over the hill there. So that's what that is. But the next thing we're going to kind of discuss is another area that's not ideal as well. It is better than an open danger area, but it's still not like ideal for when we're trying to conceal ourselves from drones, right? So that's going to be woods that is not very densely vegetated. Now granted, this is kind of, you know, pretty common and kind of inevitable if you're trying to, you know, let's say you're trying to avoid an open danger area and you're trying to go around it, right? You're probably going to find yourself walking through a section of the woods that's pretty open. Now, the reason this is not necessarily ideal as well is because when we're looking up, right, there's nothing like really protecting us from above. It's still very open and you know, very visible for when, if a drone was to, you know, come over top, or they were trying to search these woods down below, they can still very easily spot you. So kind of the best way to go about, you know, avoiding being spotted as much as possible is trying to pick trees or objects that have a good amount of cover over top that's going to prevent you from, you know, being seen as easily. So I'm just going to provide a little bit of a demonstration of what some movement maybe would look like when we're talking about this. All right, so now I'm over here. I apologize if it's a little bit hard to hear me. I'm a little bit farther away from the camera right now. I need to get myself a little microphone so I'm all professional, you know. But some movement, you know, in a less vegetated area of the woods might look something kind of like this, where I'm staying really close to a big tree, right? This tree is giving me not only concealment from what's over there, but is giving me more concealment from above, right? So when I've determined that is a good time to move, I'm gonna kind of look for my next spot that I want to go to, and I see this big tree over here, so I'm gonna kind of just, you know, quickly get over to it, and I'm gonna hug this tree as well, right? Sorry if it's hard to see me. This is essentially going to, you know, prevent me from being spotted as easily, not only from the ground, but from the sky as well. All right, so we've talked a little bit about what a less ideal or a bad area would look like when we're talking about drones and concealment. So now let's kind of discuss what you're really looking for when you're trying to conceal yourself from drones. And a prime example of this in the woods is going to be evergreens, right? And the reason evergreens are great is because they give you this really dense canopy above you, right? So when you're looking down from the top, it's very hard to spot what's underneath it. Now granted, this area of the woods I'm in is kind of really bad. There's not a lot of evergreens here, so we have this kind of this single tree that we're gonna have to work with. But this tree is not, obviously it's a, you know, it's not very dense, but it is way more dense and prevents things from seeing above way better than these hardwoods do, right? Now, when I'm sitting under here, if you were looking down from the top, it would be a lot harder to see me than it would be if I was like out here on one of these skinnier trees with no leaves or anything on it, just straight branches, right? So this is a really good example of what you want to look for. Now, if you're in an area that has more evergreens, or it's more densely populated with evergreens, it's a lot easier to move through that area without being spotted, right? So like I see an evergreen over there behind the camera, right? If I was to move from this position to another position, I would pick that tree and I would try and get there as quickly as possible, right? This is really just kind of like a prime example of what you want to look for when it comes to moving through the woods, right? And that's kind of like the best way, in my opinion, like when it comes to the woods at least. Obviously, like urban setting is different, but that's really what's going to provide you the most concealment from above is evergreens. All right, so another really good example of something that's going to provide you good concealment from the sky is some sort of shelter, right? So this is a very conveniently placed some sort of lean-to that somebody has put up, but this would be a great area to basically conceal yourself or hide away from drones, right? So one thing about drones too is that they can be loud, right? They tend to have like a very bee sound, like that buzzing. If you've never heard one, that's kind of what I guess I would say they sound like. But granted, they are still quiet. But if you hear a drone coming, we'll say, right, and there happens to be some sort of shelter, it doesn't necessarily have to look like this. It could be like a building or something that has good cover from over top. Then you can kind of get yourself inside here, right? So if I just happen to find something like this in the woods, or I was in a setting where there was some sort of shelter out there, this would be a great place to put myself to prevent myself from being spotted by a drone, right? So if I heard a drone, I can get inside here and hope that it'll just go over top and it won't spot me, right? This is a pretty good example of something that would be really great from hiding from drones. Now this is also there's a big bank here, right? And bank defilades or whatever you want to call them, embankments, stuff like that. They're really good for concealing from one side, but not so good from the other. So in the case of a drone, maybe if it's coming from that way, it can conceal you. But if it decides to turn around and look this way, you're kind of just laying on the face of it for it to see you, right? That's just kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent about banks. I just having to think about that. But yeah, shelters are another great way to conceal yourself from drones. All right, so now we've talked a little bit about some spots you want to look for and some spots you don't want to look for when it comes to concealing yourself from drones. So how does this relate to gear, right? Like I mentioned, we're talking about gear, cover, concealment and movement, right? So now we kind of talk about movement and we talk about gear. When it comes to gear, it doesn't necessarily matter what gear you're running, right, for drones. What is more important for when it comes to drones is that concealment and your movement, right? So people, it's great to have all this fancy gear and stuff like that, and have all nice matching camouflage patterns and whatnot. But what you're wearing doesn't necessarily impact your ability to hide from a drone. However, there is one caveat, and that is the lighter your setup is, right, the easier it is to move. So this brings us into the movement side. Now when we talk about movement and we talk about drones, the thing you don't want to do is be static, right? And when I say you don't want to be static, what I mean is you don't want to be sitting in one place for an extended period of time, right? We see this happen numerous times in the Ukraine war, where there is personnel sitting in one spot for a very long time, and usually the militaries over there, they will have spotter drones, right, that are flying around to basically spot enemy personnel. And if one of those spotter drones finds somebody, they can then use that drone to then, you know, call in, we'll say like artillery, right? So like that drone flies over, spots enemy personnel, they now have their exact location, they can then have artillery, you know, go to that exact location, right? Now obviously we're talking about a very specific case scenario, and when it comes to like the civilian world, or you know, just wanting to be a prepared individual, you don't necessarily have to worry about artillery and stuff like that. But if we're talking about like a case scenario where, you know, bad stuff starts happening, people starting to go crazy, stuff like that, drones are very readily accessible on the market. So when it comes to spotting, right, somebody could be like, hey, I'm flying this drone, I'm looking for people, I'm looking for resources, right? So if they spot you and you're in a spot like the same location for an extended period of time, this person now knows your exact location and they know exactly what you have. So that is kind of like the application beyond like the battlefield necessarily, which probably applies to a lot more people. And that's kind of what to think about. So when it comes to your movement, right, like I said, you don't want to be static. So the best way to prevent that is simply just not staying in one spot for a long time, right? So that might mean like, hey, I'm hanging out in this area for, I don't know, we'll say 30 minutes, right? And then I'm gonna move to a new spot. And granted, yes, it does become a pain, right? Having to constantly move, but you kind of rather, you know, be moving a lot than, you know, be spotted by a drone, right? So it's really just down to that core principle of not sitting in one spot for an extended period of time, and, you know, constantly being on the move, switching up your spot, switching the location. This is really like the best way to go about, you know, not being spotted for drones. Granted, it's, you know, drones are so new and they're still constantly thinking about how to combat them and stuff like that. So like right now in this given situation and what is on the market for civilians and stuff like that, really the best way to not be spotted by a drone and stuff like that is your concealment, like we talked about. You know, either moving, finding that cover, that concealment that's really going to hide you not only from the ground but from the sky as well. And when it comes to your gear setups and it comes to you know, your movement, you want to be lightweight, still having all the necessary supplies and gear and all that you need, right? But you don't want to be tacking on all this extra stuff that just doesn't serve a purpose or you don't necessarily need, because that's going to allow you for freedom of movement so you can move quicker, right? And again, don't stay in one spot, constantly be moving and stuff like that. That is really the best way to combat drones. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about in this video today is thermal imaging or thermal optics. Now, there's a good amount of crossover between drones and thermal imaging, so I'm not going to go as in depth as I did with drones. Now, obviously, there's thermal optics that can go on, you know, weapon systems, and there's, you know, drones also use thermal imaging as well, right? So thermal imaging is extremely difficult when you're talking about, you know, the three aspects we're talking about in today's video when it comes to your gear, your concealment and movement, right? Obviously, thermal imaging uses heat signatures to basically spot people or animals or whatever, right? So in an area like this, if somebody was to use a thermal, they could very easily spot me, right? Because everything around me is extremely cold, especially this time of year when it's winter and there's snow on the ground and stuff like that. But my body heat that we all naturally generate is going to produce a heat signature that could be spotted from all the way on the other side of this field. And it just becomes, you know, very, very difficult. Now, when we discuss gear and it comes to thermal, there's really not like a ton you can do, you know. there is materials and stuff that I've seen that people are working on to basically block your heat signature. But the best way to really combat thermal imaging is to put things between yourself and whatever, thermal system is being used. So like in this scenario, if somebody was like over there in that open field area or in the other tree line using a thermal spotting scope or a thermal optic or something to look for personnel, the best way to really combat that is going to be to get yourself away. To put more distance between yourself and that thermal system, because the further you are away, the harder it is for it to spot you, right? Now, when we talk about concealment, the best way to really do this is to kind of use the same principles we talked about when it comes to drones, right? And that's going to be to basically put more vegetation and stuff like that between yourself and that thermal imaging system. Sorry, my nose is running. It's cold out here. So when it comes to like, making a shelter, finding a shelter, stuff like that, the more the more stuff you can use to build it up to like not be seen, the better, right? Especially like in a winter setting, if you're building a shelter and you're trying to like be conscious of thermal imagery, maybe digging yourself down like into the snow, and then you want to make it like really low profile is a kind of a good strategy to go about that, right? Because the snow will obviously block the heat signature because it's cold, and the more low profile it is, the harder it is to spot. And that's a great that's a great thing to do for drones as well. Like if you have to build a shelter to sleep or whatever it may be, making it low profile is like the best way to go about it. Maybe that's a future video I'll do, is building low profile shelters. But yeah, so we've kind of tapped on gear, concealment, your movement. Kind of like I said, when it comes to movement, is really just putting distance between yourself and the thermal imaging system. That's really the best way to go about it. And granted, using the same strategies we talked about as drones. Like I said, there's a good amount of crossover between drones and thermal imaging when it comes to like movement and stuff like that. So really just like kind of bounding between those trees or bounding between buildings and stuff like that to make it harder for you to spot. Just make it harder for it to spot you or them to spot you. That's really the best way to go about it. Thermals are kind of overpowered, I guess, it's really difficult to hide from them, and unfortunately there's not like I said, there's not a ton out there on the market gear wise to like prevent being spotted by thermals. And it's difficult, right? Because we all produce body heat. It's just how we are. Animals produce body heat, and yeah, it's kind of hard to mask your natural body heat that you give off, right? Maybe one day there will be some sort of fabric or something that they'll use for clothing or something like that, like these combat pants that will help hide the heat signature. But for now, there's not a ton out there, and that's kind of just the unfortunate truth. So really, the best thing to do for when thermal imaging is kind of the best thing to do when it comes to drones, right? And that's really just having good concealment and having good movement discipline. Granted, the same thing for open danger areas like we talked about. Terrible. Easily going to be spotted, right? You don't even need a thermal optic to spot somebody unless it was like nighttime, which we're not really talking about night vision in this video. Although maybe I should have. Night vision's been around for a good amount of time, but night vision, kind of some crossovers into daytime stuff as well. Obviously we have like light discipline and stuff like that. But yeah, open danger areas, terrible spot to be, not only for drones but for thermal as well. Just all around easily spottable. The denser the vegetation is, the better. Granted, yes, dense vegetation can hinder your movement, but that's just kind of the downside you take with concealing yourself as best as possible. That's pretty much it for thermal imaging. Like I said, unfortunately, there's not a ton that you can do other than just being really disciplined and really conscious about those types of systems. All right, so the next thing we're going to kind of talk about is urban density or urban warfare. Now, granted, I'm not in like a super spectacular spot for this. I'm not like in downtown city right now, but you can tell, obviously, like when we're talking about urban settings, we're talking about very densely populated areas, and we're talking about areas that are not very wooded, right? So an example of this could be in an area like I'm in now, where there's buildings and there's cars and there's parking lots, or it could also be in a setting like you're literally in like downtown New York City. Now, obviously, populations keep building, keep spreading, and urban settings are becoming more and more popular. So when we're talking about like the modern battlefield, or we're talking about like civil unrest, urban areas is kind of where you would see this first, right? It's not necessarily going to be as common in those rural areas where it's, you know, very wooded and stuff like that. It's going to be in these settings where, you know, there's more people, there's a denser population and stuff like that. So when we're talking about gear concealment and movement for urban settings, the first thing when it comes to like gear and stuff like that is going to be, your best option might be to just try and blend in, right? This could kind of be its own entire video within itself, talking about like urban evasion and stuff like that. I know it's been done before, but it could be an entire video within itself. So gear, when we're talking about blending in, what I'm wearing right now is not a good example of blending in, right? If I was to go walking around in public, probably these cars driving past even, people are just going to be staring at me, right? Because I'm wearing multicam pants and I stick out like a sore thumb. Now, if I had on like a regular pair of pants and like a hoodie and stuff like that, then I would blend in a lot better, right? So really, like, the best way to go about it is just to, you know, throw on normal clothes and blend in. And maybe if you have a hood on, you know, you just throw your hood, you just kind of mind your own business, and you know, try and get out of what area you're in. When we're talking about like civil unrest, that's kind of really the best thing to do is to get away. So really just, you know, blending in with your surroundings and trying to get out of that area is like the best case scenario. Now, if we're in a setting where, like, you know, civil unrest has been happening for a while, or like battlefield setting, and like, you know, you're going out, maybe you need to find resources or something like that, and you're in an urban setting, again, it's going to be kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, but you're going to want to have like a lightweight setup, right? And just because that ties into your movement, and being able to move easily allows you to be a lot more deadly, and it allows you to be a lot more sneaky as well, right? So the easier it is for me to move, the easier it is gonna be for me to do whatever task I'm trying to complete. And maybe that's like, you know, not carrying thousands of rounds or all of this extra bulky stuff I don't need, right? Like if I'm just going out for like a day, and granted, like obviously a lot of stuff could happen, but if I'm just going out maybe for a few hours, whatever, I don't need to bring an entire like ruck with me filled with all my sleeping gear and stuff. Like that's just unnecessary, you know? So maybe I just bring like a day pack or something like that, just enough to sustain me for the time I'm gonna be out there, and maybe for a little bit of extra time in case stuff gets hairy. And that's kind of just like the way I think about it, is just being able to move easier. Lightweight gear setups is, you know, pretty popular right now, but I also know like having more stuff on you and having more protection has also become a lot more popular in recent years with the Ukraine war. It's really just about whatever, you know, case scenario or whatever situation you're gonna find yourself in, whatever area, you know, you live in is also gonna play a role into that as well. But fitness is a huge thing as well. You know, the fitter you are, the easier it is to move, the easier it is to do demanding tasks. So being fit is a really good and necessary principle you need to have as well, I guess. When it comes to urban settings and it comes to movement, you're really going to want to plan out your routes, right? So if you live in an urban setting, knowing specific routes to either get away from where you live or to make it to certain areas is going to be your best bet. Maybe like you won't have access to a vehicle and stuff like that, or for good reasons you don't want to use a vehicle and you need to travel on foot. Just having those pre-planned routes is just going to make your life way easier. Yeah, and that's something that I really suggest is for like anybody, no matter where you live, is just gonna having pre-planned, pre-built routes to get away from whatever area you're in. Maybe you need to leave your home or whatever, and that's just gonna be the best way to go about it. All right, so now we talk about concealment. Concealment in urban settings can be easy and difficult at the same time, right? Because you can't just go barging through buildings unless you're in like a very specific setting where everybody's fled and it's abandoned, right? When it comes to concealment, really your best bet for urban settings is just finding areas that are not wide open, right? So maybe go through a more building dense area than an open dense area, right? Concealment is just a really simple principle, and that's just putting your objects between yourself and whatever you're trying to hide from, right? And this applies to all settings. I didn't grow up in a urban setting at all. I've always lived in the rural countryside, if that's what you want to call it. And so I've always lived with like woods and stuff around me. But if you live in an area where there's no woods, kind of like what I was talking about, just having those pre-planned routes that are going to provide you concealment is the best way to really go about it. And those are kind of like the three principles that we're discussing. So when it comes to urban density, urban population, being lightweight, being able to move easily is kind of like the best way to go about your gear setups, and not bringing extra stuff. Really, what we've been hitting on all day, right? And then when it comes to movement, having those pre-planned routes to get away from specific areas, whether that be where you live, where you work, whatever, is the best way to go about that. And then concealment, just going through buildings, like maybe public buildings, stuff like that, and going through maybe areas with overhangs, or going through sections of neighborhoods that aren't like as open or as visible. That's kind of your best way to go about concealment. Some other real quick points to talk about when it comes to urban settings is vehicles and power dependence, right? So vehicles allow people to move extremely quickly and make it to areas and see areas in a very rapid and quick manner, right? So when it comes to vehicles and it comes to movement, the best way to like go about this is pretty much just avoiding main public roads or very traveled roads. So if you're in like a downtown setting, try and get away from areas that are filled with roads that people can get to very easily. And I know that's easier said than done, but the quicker you can get out of that area, the better, right? So that goes back to those like pre-planned routes I was talking about, or that kind of that blending in strategy. And now another thing to note real quick is power dependence, right? If for whatever reason the power grid goes down, you just got to be conscious of that it might be harder to do like certain tasks, right? But it might also play into your advantage also, right? If it's nighttime, the power grid goes down and there's no street lamps and stuff, it might be easier to move around. There's just kind of things that you need to keep in mind as well when we're talking about urban settings. Okay, we have now moved inside, and that's because we're talking about not what lies outside, but what lies in here, and what we all use on a daily basis, at least most of us, and that is cell phones and the internet. So now we're talking about information warfare and social media. So when it comes to the internet and social media and other platforms as such, there's something known as operational security or OPSEC. And it's just a fancy term for basically saying, like, don't post stuff that would give away your current location or vulnerable information, right? So this can be as simple as like posting on your Instagram story of, hey, I'm going on vacation on this date at this time, right? Maybe to like some people doesn't seem that big of a deal, but it can lead to numerous things happening. First of all, people know exactly where you're going to be, exactly when you're going to be there, right? And the other thing too is that people know when you're not going to be home, right? So they know when you're on vacation, they know how long you're gone for, they know you're not going to be home. Therefore, they take advantage of that, and you might come home to your house being burglarized, right? Or something else, somebody stealing something, whatever. That's kind of just the basic principles, right? So how do you avoid this kind of information / social media abuse that people use? And the best way to go about it is just being very conscious about what you post online and the information that you share, right? So I know we've been talking about gear and we've been talking about concealment and movement, but when it comes to information warfare and it comes to social media, it's very different, right? We don't care about the gear, we don't care about concealment, and we don't care about movement. Now, when it comes to, okay, maybe I shouldn't say we don't care about it, but it looks different, right? So for like gear, like maybe it's not the best or wisest idea to be posting everything you have at your disposal or in your armory, right? I know people love gear pictures and they love all of this, but it lets other people know what you have exactly. Sure, it's all right to post pictures of your firearms or your gear setups or whatever, but maybe there's some sensitive items that you don't want to be posting online for people to see, right? And that could be like, maybe you have like a ham radio setup, right? That you don't want other people knowing that you have, because you don't want people to try and, use your setup or take advantage of that. It's just like some sort of case scenario maybe, right? Now when it comes to concealment looks very different, and concealment in this is not so much of a physical thing as it is a digital thing, and that is kind of covering your digital footprint, right? And what that means is trying to erase your name from websites and your address and all of your personal information, because you can pretty easily search up your name and it'll show you where you live. It'll have your name, your phone number, sometimes your email address, and that's how all these spam callers and all that manage to get your information. You can pay for websites to erase your data for you. You can do it manually, but just be very conscious of that as well. And when it comes to like movement, I guess there's no real good like movement idea other than just being very proactive about not posting certain things, right? So it's very, very straightforward when it comes to information warfare and social media, and it's just being very conscious about the information that you share with others, right? Maybe don't share your children's age and stuff like that. It's very like little stuff that maybe doesn't seem like super significant, but it's all just information that the so-called enemy can use against you, right? So don't be posting pictures of the inside of your house, and don't be sharing your address and all of this information, and like I said, telling people when you're going on vacations and stuff like that, because you're giving these the enemy or whatever you want to call them. You're giving them little pieces of information here and there that they can all use to compile and formulate a plan against you, right? Now, like, sure, you could post like, hey, I'm, sitting on the beach or whatever you're doing on your Instagram story, but just be very cautious on what you post. And again, it's called operational security. This is what it can be called, and this kind of just ties into like, military stuff, and it's not like you don't want to, share information with people that that shouldn't know or you don't want to know, right? And that's pretty much just the very basic principle when it comes to social media. And the reason I'm talking about this is because obviously social media is huge nowadays. It's just completely taken over, right? And it's so easy for people to access information about you. And it's so easy to post something about your life online for millions of people to see, millions, billions, whatever, right? You post an Instagram reel, well, that's now out in the public for everybody to see. Just stuff like that. So that's kind of why I'm talking about it, just because it's so prevalent today. And it's just something to be very cautious about, and not something that people tend to think about as much, but it can lead you to be, very vulnerable in certain situations and aspects. All right, so in this video, we talked about drones, we talked about thermal imagery, we talked about urban settings, we talked about information warfare and social media, and these are all like the four kind of big changes that have happened over the course of, the last several years when it comes to, being prepared and like modern warfare, right? So again, we discussed some ways to avoid these situations or combat against them. But if I was to if now that I have this information, if I was to go forward, or like if I was to change my setups or change the way I do things based off of like the way things are today, what I would do when it comes to gear is I would be very conscious about the amount of weight that I'm carrying and how I'm like setting up my gear, right? So you just have to be very specific on how you set it up for like what you're trying to do exactly, or what you want it to be, right? Whether it be a sustainment setup or you are trying to do like a direct action setup, stuff like that. So you just need to be very excuse me. You need to be very specific on how you set your gear up nowadays, right? Being very weight conscious is extremely important. And that again ties into movement because it allows you to, have more freedom of movement, move quickly, stuff like that. And movement is very, very key nowadays. So I would incorporate these new principles of not being static and staying in long periods of times into my training routines, right? And start to be more and more conscious about those kind of principles. That's kind of how I would, start transitioning into this kind of idea. If, focusing more on the, future and stuff like that. And then I would also, start incorporating more concealment and stuff like that into my training as well, and learn how to make, those low profile shelters and how to reduce my heat signature through concealment and stuff like that. Just stuff that I would, really be paying attention to and doing tons of research on, and, building my gear based off of those types of case scenarios. Obviously still being conscious of the stuff that's, been around forever, like ground forces type stuff and all that. But you need to now add on this extra layer of precaution. And that's kind of what I would really pay attention to and focus on nowadays, moving forward into the future, just because it's just going to continue to get more advanced, and we're just going to have this more and more stuff we need to pay attention to, right? So for now, the state that we're in right now, this is what I would really focus on going forward. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. I hope that you learned something new, or you had a new idea that maybe you didn't think of before, but now you're thinking of after this video. This video I made to really talk about kind of the current state that the world is in when it comes to, civil unrest and, modern warfare, thinking about the modernizations that have come out over the last few years, and really touching base on like how people should be thinking and how they should be building out their gear setups and stuff. That is why I wanted to make this video, just because I think it's something that people need to be very conscious about nowadays. Specifically going into the future as stuff just continues to get more and more advanced. So I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe if there's a topic I talked about, like I know I had mentioned, how urban warfare and all that can be its own video within itself. If that's something you guys are interested in, want to see, let me know. As always, if there's ideas or there's videos that you guys want to see, please let me know down in the comments, and I'm happy to make those videos. I'm hoping to do some more gear stuff here in the future, and some more firearm content. So stay tuned. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. If you did, consider leaving a like and maybe subscribe. I would really appreciate that. As always, I also have an Instagram page for the channel. It's Ready Society on Instagram. So if you want to support me in the second way as well, a follow there would be great as well. So thank you for watching today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.